Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's LinkedIn Live session from Forrester. My name is Melissa Weil. I am a client executive here on the Forrester government team. And with me is my colleague, Bobby Cameron, who is VP and Principal Analyst here at Forrester. Just a couple notes before we get started. We'd love for this to be an interactive session. So please feel free to use the comment section here if you have any questions, and we'll answer them in our Q&A at the end. But Bobby, it's so nice to chat with you again. I appreciate your time. I know that the life of an analyst is very, very busy, so we appreciate this today.
Well, it's a perfect opportunity, Melissa. Always happy to speak to clients. It's a wonderful way to learn.
This is going to be exciting. So let's get started, and I'll start with the very disruptive year we've had, to say the least. What has the pandemic done to government technology strategy? What have you been seeing?
Well, I think the best place to start that conversation is to recognize that there are different organizations, different agencies who've had different impact. Some have lost tax revenue to the extent that they've just been doing radical budget cuts and discontinuation of services. Other agencies have been able to, particularly the revenue based, have been able to pick up some. So you might think of transportation or maybe waste management that has fees associated with it for a state and local. And then you got those who have, in fact, maybe had a surge of funding through the various federal grants that have occurred, and they've got money to spend. So, all of you out there, we do understand that not all of you are in one bucket. So when we speak, we'll try to speak to sort of the leading edge, those who are healthy, but we recognize that's not everyone. But one thing, Melissa, that we saw in some data we were lucky enough to have, we had some immediately pre-COVID data from December 19 to January 20, about 7,000 respondents, including government sectors globally.
Oh, wow.
And we revisited 10% of those in May. So kind of by that time, the pandemic had set in. And the most interesting thing is that everybody maintained the same strategy for business, for how they were managing the technology and which technologies they were procuring. They may not have been able to spend because of the impact of the pandemic and the recession and the loss of revenue. But the intention was the same. And so I think as we go into we encourage you to think about what we're talking about in terms of what your strategy is and what you're trying to achieve. And we'll try to relate that view of the pandemic impact to you. But many of you who actually have money to spend are in fact accelerating your strategies, particularly digital strategies you had at first.
That's interesting. And the surveys themselves, the fact that we are able to do those and we can see the results is nice to be able to follow that progress. And just the insights there is pretty astonishing. I think, Bobby, we've seen a lot of shifting market dynamics, right? So how is that sort of redefined what an IT operating model is and what it's been?
Well, the whole decade of the 2010s has been an interesting mix of things. I think the most important for our government customers and friends is that we have seen investment in technology increase, but with a flat productivity. So in other words, spending more and enjoying it less. And the whole context there is that digital itself, just building out mobile solutions, for instance, had an accelerated perception of value, but we didn't continue to do it correctly. We ended up with digital sameness, where everybody was doing the same thing and not really pushing the needle. And so the second half of the decade, productivity was down, and our customers were telling us they were not getting the results they expected based on their first 5-year experience with digital. So then you start tie that into some other data we've got where employee experience and customer experience were flattening. They were anemic during the second half of that decade. And that suggests that we were also not trying to push effectively enough the experience of those that we service. So for the government agencies, those are employees, other agencies they serve, and the businesses and citizens who are maybe the ultimate recipients of the value they create. And so that's the mood we're entering the 2020s with. And what we find then is that remember, the strategies are the same coming out of the pandemic, but this acceleration, we're seeing companies who are committed to what we're calling a future fit tech strategy. We're seeing them succeed better than those that aren't. And just to give you a real quick highlight of that, they are adaptive. They're able to change the business model they have, the way they do things pretty quickly. They've got some flexibility in the technology. They are able to use predictive technologies, analytics, big data, artificial intelligence to better understand what the needs are, and then to shift the organization better. A big challenge for government, but they're doing that. They're also creative. So from that flat miasma around digital, they're bringing the human element into the technology and elevating that. And then finally, they are able to be resilient. Now, the pandemic itself was an immediate and horrific cause of challenge around that. But we see systemic risk. So think of global trade wars, think of global warming, look at the 08-09 recession. Some of us have yet to really fully recover from that. Put all that in the bucket. We don't think we're over all of this change. So we think the resilience is key. So that future fit tech strategy, adaptive, creative, and resilient.
So resilience is interesting, and I hear that a lot speaking to a lot of our federal clients. How does an organization become resilient?
Well, these are, by the way, tied together. We put them in a bucket. In fact, when we did survey data in August, September of 2020, we didn't find a lot of air among those three. It's because if I want to be resilient, I need to be able to adapt. I need flexible technology. I don't know what's happening. If you think of adaptive, that means responding to things I can anticipate. Resilient means I'm responding to things I can't fully anticipate. I might have an idea of the nature of them, denial of service on my website, or loss of power, or regulatory shifts. And the poor IRS right now in the middle of this huge new new payment scheme, they've had to push tax filing off a month. But why? Because they have to be resilient. So those kinds of things then require adaptive. And the human creative factor, trying to engage more with the constituents, is a way to make all that change occur. So that also supports resilience. That if I can, leverage my third parties and my employees better, then I'm going to be able to be more resilient.
So that's interesting. I do want to go back to something you had said earlier, which is around customer obsession. Why is being customer obsessed so important for these government agencies? And what does customer obsession really mean?
Yeah. So it's an important factor. We see it show up in employee experience. Focus on that. A focus on citizen experience, and you can look at I think it's a couple of years old now, the White House mandate that government organizations, federal organizations, focus on citizen experience. You look at that orientation, and the idea is that instead of having a mission that we build and propagate out to the constituents, we look at what the constituents are trying to accomplish and mold our mission to fit that context. That's what the customer experience, constituent experience means. And we start looking at the data. We've been working on employee experience for about 5 years now, and we see significant information that suggests if the employee is able to use technology to get their job done more easily, they tend to comply with the technology more, use it more. And they also look for more technology and become advocates. So they support its usage. And the same thing occurs with constituents outside the agency. So if I'm working with other government agencies or maybe businesses and citizens, the more I provide my mission in the context of what they're doing, the more successful the engagement is, and it meets their expectations and needs. Uptake of the technology reduces my cost, speeds up time to benefit, reduces some of the error rates. So those are this whole experience animal is a critical part of this future fit strategy. It's all about that customer obsession. And when we talk about that, we don't get into anything that's soft. There's some concrete elements that are part of it. It's being customer led. So the constituent in, what are they doing? Insights driven, smarter decisions using AI, other kinds of decision support to target information. Then fast, so that when we change things, we change them in the context of the customer, iteratively testing whether or not they work. And finally, connected. The constituents expect our services to, in fact, reach all the way across the agency, multiple agencies, on into the constituents' environment. So you put all that together, that's what customer obsession is, and it brings to light the notion of, improved products and services and experience for our constituents.
And it's interesting, you said at the beginning, like customer obsession and CX is tied to employee experience. I would have never thought that those are almost indirectly tied. Could you expand more a little bit about EX and why that's important for a future fit strategy?
Sure. Well, the part I mentioned just a minute ago is just in terms of employee engagement and productivity. But think of it the other way around. Think of in your local state, the Department of Motor Vehicles, and you go in to get a driver's test, or the single ID, or one of these things.
Yeah.
You're dealing with people, the employees of that agency, and as a consequence, if those employees are more empowered to get their job done and be more effective at it, and it's easier for them to do it, they enjoy doing it more, and therefore they engage more in the whole experience. For the whole range of constituents is upgraded. So it's a cycle that is self-reinforcing, a virtuous cycle, if you will, that you improve the experience of the employee who's providing services, then that helps those who receive those services have a better experience as well.
Now, that makes sense. And gosh, if we could all have a better DMV experience, that would be great.
Oh, no. There's some might be listening. Be careful.
Well, so future fit as a term, let's talk a little bit about that. What does future fit mean? Like, what is that?
So we began the research on that actually almost a year ago exactly, just pre-pandemic. And what we were doing is trying to explain what we saw happening by leading edge IT organizations. And government has its share. Won't mention any agencies that don't have their permission to do so, but they're government agencies, at least parts of them, that are really firing on all cylinders. And so we're trying to figure out what are those folks doing different. And we see the same in the commercial space. And when we started to look at it and came up with that notion of that adaptive, creative, and resilient, that explained a lot of the behavior. And what was really nice is then when we looked down one more level to see what this future fit strategy, tech strategy, how it manifests, we found three key drivers. We found platforms, so technology platforms, bundles of technology provided. We found practices, the practices centering around being able to work jointly, so shared accountability. A lot of missions, in fact, are working hard to create that shared accountability. And then the whole notion of partners. And of course, a lot of government agencies utilize third parties for their technology. But if I'm using platforms, and let's say it's cloud, it might be a platform, or my ERP to operate my HR and finance, or other systems like that I'm using, content management, where I use something like from Adobe. I put those platforms in place. I'm now relying on the third party to manage those on my behalf. And what that says is that then this whole system of platforms, practices, and partnership works to create that adaptive, creative, and resilient environment. I deployed less technology on top of a platform, so I can change faster, more easily. In fact, I can democratize my development with low code, no code, push that out into the hands of people who need to do it. RPA for managing workflows, for instance. And so I reduce the number of technologists. I can optimize the performance by how I manage the platform. And that also allows me to share accountability for the results, And so now I can get multiple teams working on the same problem because we all agree on what the result looks like, and we can create transparency and consistency in our approach. That creates trust, and we don't have to keep dropping back to governance organizations to approve our next step. It allows for speed and flexibility. And finally, the partnerships. We find more and more organizations establishing co-innovation partnerships to create and support the change that they're trying to drive.
So, I mean, that's interesting. I would actually, a little bit of a question around the technologies themselves. You know, we have a lot of technologies and we have a lot of research around AI and machine learning. And you mentioned a little bit about like RPA, right? But for those technologies around automation or technologies that our agencies are looking at implementing but haven't gotten there yet, how do those fit into this process? Like, you know, tell me a little bit more about AI or machine learning or technologies of that nature.
So I think the key trend in technology is that platform-based, and AI is a great example, for instance, and machine learning. Most organizations take their first step into using those, or maybe even for a while, the practice is dominated by a cloud partner. So they stand up in the cloud because they don't have to buy the technology up front, which can be a major purchase decision. They are able to access it in the cloud. They find the skills they need to operate the technology in the cloud. And so they can focus their staff on the top of the platform, small amounts of technology to achieve significant results. Then as they move forward, they can make a choice of whether or not they need to move it on-prem. And you get in some government agencies, and again, the IRS pops into my mind, we've got gargantuan quantities of data, and there's almost nobody out there who's going to run that for them. They've got their own compute challenges and data challenges and can't even test unless they're in their own environments. So the people like that might choose to start in the cloud, proof of concept, get it moving, develop some algorithms and pull it in-house. Whereas, you know, other agencies, you know, I'm thinking much smaller, maybe more specialized. Somebody like the Library of Congress might choose, okay, let's move this into an environment where we can be more flexible and rely more on those third parties and take our internal talent and put that into greater creativity and worrying about resilience and adaptivity. So that's the first part to think about, is that standing up the technologies is faster using the platforms, and those technologies can be complex. But if we push that now into the future fit tech strategy and think about what those can drive, then if I'm looking to predict what changes are occurring, then I'm going to increasingly use the machine learning capabilities to study the data, see if I can't understand changes that are coming, and develop policies and practices to support that. And so those technologies shift from being, how do I automate something, which is an important use, and the RPA piece, again, is the core element there. But I move into a space where I am now trying to drive my ongoing investments to keep up with changes that are occurring, instead of wait till they get calcified and say, whoo, maybe I should go address that one. You know, if I'm good at this, then I can keep up with it as it moves forward.
Well, in talking a little bit about these technologies, you know, what and change itself, AI and automation especially, these are somewhat scary topics for employees and for leaders in agencies to talk to their employees about. You know, can you tell me a little bit about what maybe you're seeing or some of those conversations and how they can navigate that?
That's a very good point, Melissa. Glad you brought us back to that, because it comes all the way back to that employee experience. If I am concerned for my job and I have to participate in some way with implementing an RPA that I'm worried might take my job away, I'm not likely to be as creative. So what that says is I got to bring change management, organizational change management, into the process more completely and earlier. And we see organizations historically doing this very well. The Bank of England jumps into my mind, where they 4 or 5 years ago had some major infrastructure shifts they were going through, and they were essentially virtualizing the tech stack, and a bunch of jobs were expected to be eliminated by a greater automation and the DevOps kind of implementations. What they did is started a training program where they, over a 5-year period, expected to move a significant number of jobs, worked with the individuals to provide training to see what they wanted to do that was new coming up, and therefore shifted the staff. And it's that kind of planning. Now bring it back to what companies are doing. It's that kind of planning that can help them move forward. And we have actually a piece of assessment, a tool that can be used. We call it the robotics quotient. And we're able to help a CIO leader understand better what the demands are they need to address, and how ready their organization is for this type of automation. And I guess one final point, it's not binary. Today I'm, running it with people, tomorrow I'm not. There's a long period of transition during which we need people to be working with the automation tools. In fact, that might never disappear. We'll find out as we get richer and richer into it. But as it stands right now, there are very few things that we can just turn the switch on and say, oh, that's okay. It's kind of like, I went away this weekend and I was turning the dishwasher on, and my wife said, no, don't do that while we're gone. I said, no, it'll clean the dishes. They'll be clean. She said, but what if it doesn't work right? I mean, that's been around a long time, and it is automated, but she was right. We've got
She's
a friend.
Right. You don't know, Bobby.
She absolutely is right. But she doesn't ever load the dishwasher, but that's a whole different story. That's my job.
We'll have another LinkedIn Live about that.
That's right.
I think, one of my last questions before we turn it over to the audience, I think we do have a couple questions. And if you do, be sure to put them in the comments section here. You spoke a little bit about cloud. And in a lot of my conversations, cloud strategy and implementing a multi-cloud strategy is at a starting point for the organizations I'm talking to. What is the maturity level that you're seeing? And if an agency is starting out in cloud or starting out looking at multi-cloud, how should they begin there?
Well, I think you said it quite correctly. It's a maturity question. Mm-hmm. And what we find is that the more customer obsessed a firm, and here an agency is, the more sophisticated their solutions get to be because of this adaptive, creative, and resilient strategy they start to implement. Early stages, we call them beginning the transformation journey. Those early stages, many of them are trying to find the right cloud. Let's get the right cloud. Pick one. Is it going to be, Azure from Microsoft or AWS from Amazon? Turns out that already today, somewhere around 2/3 of companies are running 5 or more cloud stacks, and they're not being silly about it. Because you run Azure if you run Microsoft Office. If you run SAP, you either run their private cloud or you're running one of the hyperscalers. You get multi-cloud easily by just choosing a solution. You stand up AI. You've got some place where they've got what you need in terms of software. Maybe your data is resident already in their systems, et cetera. So the first suggestion is that think about the fact that you will be hybrid multi-cloud. Hybrid meaning you're running traditional on-prem architectures with some version of cloud. And then the second is to recognize you've got to manage in a multi-cloud hybrid space. So you need to look for technologies that create transparency, that allow you to see how performance is occurring and take action to respond to situations that occur. So cloud's not free. You really take some work. Mm-hmm. And then finally, the cloud strategy is very much one of trying to treat that as a platform and mature the whole ability to sit on top of the cloud in a native form. And that means moving into containers like Kubernetes. And putting your technology inside a container means that all the services around you are provided through a consistent interface. Some portability, yes, but most importantly, you're able to leverage all of the facilities without having to restructure your code.
Thank you, Bobby. Let me check just the chat real quick. And again, if you have a question, we have time for a couple questions. Please be sure to put them in the chat. I think while we're waiting, Bobby, maybe we can address security. We didn't talk a whole lot about that. There's obviously an incredible amount of cybersecurity concerns, and particularly in the federal environment. How would you address that in a future fit conversation?
Well, security is one of those things that increasingly permeates everything. A lot of us start out with security, and we're thinking it's control of access, authentication, and then if we got more digital platforms, particularly websites, then we're worried about denial of service or some sort of performance impact, or the more sophisticated these folks are, the more cybersecurity it becomes an issue, and the ability to penetrate our systems means we've got to shift from external major perimeter control, which is the authentication at the edge, to what Forrester calls zero trust, which is everything's protected. So that even we call it micro domains and micro perimeters, so that we protect data, pieces of data, the systems the data run in, the hardware it runs on, the operating systems. And when you protect all those pieces, then if someone penetrates one of them, you have an opportunity to discover them before they can penetrate enough of the space to do something with it. So that's really what's happening. Is it's moving from an isolated piece that 20, 30 years ago when I worked in banking, we were just worried about the outer door and people banging on the outer door. We call the FBI.
The physical security, yeah.
It felt that way. Now we were maybe 10, 15 people banging on the door in a day. We could take care of that by ringing 911. You get 10 or 15 every nanosecond. It's a whole different animal. So it's automated. We've got to use very sophisticated tools, and we got to manage all these perimeters, particularly, as you pointed out, you segued into security in this hybrid multi-cloud.
Yeah, it's just such a hot topic this year, especially. I think we do have a couple questions. Let me double check.
Sure.
So one of the questions is, how can we be adaptive in government? Which often has a lot of regulations to adhere to. So maybe let's address what adaptive is.
Well,
and I know you talked a little bit about it, but yeah.
It's one of my favorite notions is that we think, well, adaptive means no holds barred. Just it's a free for all. And I worked with one of the Federal Reserve districts a couple of years ago. CIO there wanted to do innovation. And a lot of his peers were saying, give me a break. We can't innovate. That's dangerous. And so the phrase he put around it is exactly the right phrase. We got to learn to innovate in a bureaucracy. So you talk about, they are regulatory, right? I mean, that's their job. They are a bureaucracy. Mm-hmm. So they have to stay in that particular set of guardrails. Well, that's the point. So the notion of adaptivity is the context in which your mission has to operate. And it goes into who your constituents are, employees always included, but other agencies and external customers, and what kinds of technologies you use and how well they match the regulatory structures. And then within that, you want to shift to platforms as much as possible and as much ability to be flexible.
It makes a lot of sense. I want to make sure that we come away with, and there's a couple more questions. We will get to those. We'll have somebody reach out to you directly. But Bobby, we have a little bit of time left. What's your takeaway? What's your key takeaway for the audience here?
Well, I guess I would start with putting it in context. This is probably here I've been in IT 44 years. This is probably the most exciting time I've been in, because there's so much change and there's so much integration among all the moving parts that it's just fun and a lot more things we can do because the technology is matured. So think of it as weaving a fabric as opposed to a single work. I got to get the right work stream. It's like I got to pick the right cloud. It's not going to happen. So think about the three P's, as we call them, the platforms, practices, and partners as a way to work through this whole notion of having a future fit strategy and being more able to be customer obsessed. That's customer led, insights driven, fast, and connected. And what happens there is if I create shared accountability, that's the practices, I can work better on my mission across the agency. I can be sure that I'm working effectively to get my work done. If I build on platforms, then I don't have to worry as much about the huge tech stack that's underneath the platform. I can work at the top. Gives me greater flexibility to move when I need to. I don't have to shake the whole stack every time I want to move. And think about the partnerships, being able to drive speed, reduce shadow IT, engage with their innovation, the partner's ability to innovate. That allows me then to move in this whole focus. And a couple of things that are almost go without saying, but let's say them. Focus on that employee experience. You gotta continue to shift how you design things so that you're treating with the employee, and of course, community experience as well. The community, the constituents, the environment in which you deliver the mission, all of that should be taken into account from a design and ongoing operational perspective. Do those things and you'll be future fit.
That's so helpful. Bobby, it's so nice to chat with you again. Thank you again for the time, and thank you for the audience. And there, at the bottom here, there is a webinar next week. It's complimentary. Bobby will be there, and he'll expand upon these topics and a little bit more on his research. So the registration link is also in the comments section. But any questions we weren't able to, we'll follow up with you directly. And Bobby, thank you again.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks, Mel. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks everyone.